All right, well, actually, we're going to get to something that doesn't usually happen. I agree with Paul. So we're moving on. We're 30 minutes late, and I'm the guy who's between you and break. So you know what's going to happen now. Hang on. Okay. Now, before we get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit. Simon, he left, but I wish he was here. I just can't thank him enough for the CEO of a major airplane manufacturing company to say that he believes in flight training. Who's got their GPS and which way is Wichita? Are you listening? But anyway, we'll go on in that. All right. Second thing, Don. Odd. That we took very different paths and ended up in the same place. You just turned 60. I'm about to turn 60. You were in Brooklyn. I was across the river, all right, in Jersey. You went in the Air Force. I went in the Air Force. Now, I turned out to be a fighter pilot, but I studied 4 years of drama and theater at my tour in the Pentagon, okay? And I think the place you and I are both going to get to is this quasi-reality that exists in either of our own heads at any given time. And when I no longer have to put on the FAA medical that I haven't used banned substances, you and I need to get together, okay? Thornton, thank God you're here, because before you got here, everybody thought I was the one who was nuts. Now let's move on. This year I got some very serious things to talk about. It's about building airplanes, none of the longevity of last year. We're not going to do any of that. No cheap shots at Cessna other than the 3 or 4 I plan to take. And certainly no cheap shots at Piper, since now he's drunk from the Kool-Aid. He's one of the, he's one of the guys, and we're going to support him now on the flight training team. And of course, I'm not going to do any gratuitous exploitation of monkeys that suffer real addictions, so there will be no smoking monkey jokes in the entire presentation. So, stop it. Okay. No, it's only going to get worse. So who are we? Redbird Flight Simulations. It isn't so much a flight simulation company, just as Redbird Services isn't really a services company, just as ProFlight Aviation isn't really a flight training company inside of this, any more than Skyport's an FBO, and really any more than Redbird Media is a media publishing outfit. What we are is a group of people who are a flight training development company. And that's what we're doing, flight training development. In many ways, and my apologies to Michael Eisner, we are the Imagineering department for general aviation. And although that sounds a little audacious to say that, look around. Show me somebody else who's doing it, and I'll be glad to retract the statement. And what we know out of this, what we all believe at a fundamental core out of this, is that, and please pay attention, Scotty. For those of you who don't know what that is, spread it around. I'll give it another 4 seconds like a hand grenade, okay? Pay attention, Scotty, all right? Without a healthy flight training industry, there is no general aviation. And that is what we're, sorry. Jack, do you need to excuse yourself? Okay. Our goal in this is to make flight training more efficient, more economical, and certainly more enjoyable than it has been. Now, the AOPA study that we've talked about for the last 2 years said 3 things that we knew all along, but they formalized that and said, people think flight training is too hard, it takes too long, and it's too expensive. So what are we doing about that? Well, let's talk about the too hard first. Our simulation products, as you know from the discussions we've had in the last couple of years, allow the learner to develop the intrinsic memory skills that they need to be successful in transitioning to flying an airplane in a much faster, easier, and palatable way. And this makes the transition to the airplane really easy. Now, while I'm not here to talk about the results of the flight training side, let me tell you, everything I told you last year, it's worked like a champ. As a matter of fact, every single day, we turn out another private, instrument, or commercial applicant with about a 98% pass rate, perfectly well qualified. It's getting really, really boring, okay? Now, our methodologies, which we continue to change, reduce the amount of information that the learner has to absorb, which makes the process of learning to fly or learning to fly instruments in a way that not only makes the retention of that information better in the long term, but they can actually apply that information in real-world situations. And Jeff talked to you about that, and we'll be talking to you about that early in next spring about how that's going to mature. To the extent that I don't want to trivialize this, we do not teach ground school. Let me say that another way. We do not teach ground school. And it sounds like the same way, but that was for emphasis, okay, Doug? That's a little transition we use in the business here to make sure the guys like you are still awake, all right, after the hours, okay? We help customers develop analytical and decision-making skills so they can apply the information that they learn in the cockpit when they need to do it. It just so happens that the information that we're using to develop those skills happens to be aviation. If you want to talk about that, we'll talk about that tomorrow in the breakout sessions. Okay. And of course, too long. Now, I told you we've been producing private pilots consistently in 3 to 4 weeks. And when the next version of GIST comes in and we can refine some of the ways that we do the information that would typically be done on the ground or with an instructor in the simulator, I'm confident we can reduce that to a pretty much guaranteed 3-week out-the-door time. And of course, that's with a very high first-time pass rate, and they are highly competent. And don't take my word on it. Ask the other examiners in the room. They come and examine here as well. Okay? Too expensive. What do we do about that? Again, simulation. Duh. Do I need to say that again? Okay, you got that. Okay. Certainly that's going to reduce the cost of training. But what we're here to talk about now is, what about the airplane in this equation, which is something that heretofore we couldn't control the cost of. So let's talk about that. Now, in about 2003, you would have heard me wearing another shirt talk about how with $5,000 down, CFC would finance the aircraft at about 6%. We talked about the depreciation schedule. We talked about how the airplane would pay for itself in 2 years, all to get you to buy a $150,000 Skyhawk. Now, some of you couldn't get financing. So what did we do? Well, we got some of your renters, we got at seminars, we had them talked about how they established an LLC, talked about 179 deductions, talked about SIFL, we talked about, that's really not a bad thing, talked about SIFL, passive activity rules, how they could put this together, and we wrote a management agreement that you could use so they could take all the tax advantages of the airplane, you could still have a brand new airplane, all to sell you a $150,000 Skyhawk. Okay? Now, here's a question. Who understood what I just said? Raise your hand. Who didn't understand what I just said? It doesn't matter. None of it works anymore. It's history. Why? Why is it history? Well, it doesn't work anymore, and the reason it doesn't work anymore is simple. First of all, you need more than $5,000 down to buy an airplane, I can assure you. CFC stands for Can't Finance Cessnas. Is Josh here? Sorry. That's actually second. You can count the cheap shots, Cessna. but most of all, the basic cost of the aircraft is too high to make any reasonable financial model work. You would have to charge something in the neighborhood of $360 or $70 to your customer per hour to make the financial work in any realistic way. And that's just not going to happen, and it's unsupportable. Now, Cessna's talking about a Skyhawk with prices north of, anybody want to throw out that figure? $400,000. It isn't going to work. So, what we need to do, that's 3, you're counting, right? Okay. Look at the alternatives. Now, the LSA market. We here have looked at every LSA we could possibly look at. Would it work? Have we tried it? Have we test flown it? And we found out that, unfortunately, these aircraft, the way they are designed and built, are just not durable enough for the day-in, day-out VFR and IFR training market in a flight school that is putting on more than 100 hours a month in their flight training. And, of course, what's the resale value? And the answer is nobody knows what the resale value is because nobody can sell them, okay? Now, here's a thought. Why don't we take, sorry, Simon's gone, the best all-around flight training airplane ever built and just remanufacture it? And we'll call it this. Let's talk a little bit about the Redhawk Project and where we're going. We take a 70s, 80s version, 172, strip it, disassemble it. And when I say disassemble it, we take every nut, bolt, and screw that can be taken off the airplane comes off, and about 100 more rivets. I'd like to call it a taillight forward restoration, but we actually have to change out the taillight as well. So the whole airplane. Then we put it all back together, and we use new parts, and we use reliable alternatives to what was there before in the 70s. And we put in components that we think are going to be cost effective for the flight school. All of these things happen in that process. I just want to draw your attention to the last one. We are working on now the paperwork to finalize or to get the process finalized for an STC so that we can put in the restart style 23G seats that eliminate the problem in the old seats of slipping backwards. We don't believe that you should have to buy a new airplane or remanufactured airplane and put a seat belt of its own on the seat. We don't think there should be a seat belt holding the pilot's seat underneath the seat. So we're going to get all that taken care of. But as I said, our friends in the local FSDO, they were on a 14-day paid vacation, and they're so exhausted, they just couldn't come back and do some work for us. But they're going to catch up, because they're party guys. They'll get back into it. Okay. So what do? Well, we find the airplane, strip it, remove any etch, any corrosion, etch it, allodyne it, and here's where we started. This was a 1980s P model. This is the airplane you're going to see outside the door. And let me tell you, I've seen a cream puff, and this weren't no cream puff, okay? This had 30 years of nasty all over it, and the engine was run out. As a matter of fact, even though it was signed off as airworthy with a recent annual, when we got it back here, I'm surprised it made the 18.5-minute flight from the Smithville airport to the San Marcos airport. So what do? We bring it in and we strip it. That looks better already to me, quite frankly. And of course, let's stop with the outside. There's lots of nasty on the inside, too. And of course, this airplane got a new firewall. And why did it get a firewall? Because they all need a new firewall, okay? 30 years of flight training, and we know that this is one of the weak points in the system. There are going to be cracks, and why should we remanufacture an airplane with cracks in the firewall? Or we could just legally stop drill it. Well, considering that the people who build this airplane and myself are the first person to test fly it, we're going to make sure that firewall probably doesn't have any cracks before we start on it, okay? And then we hang a new engine. Now the question comes, as Don was talking about, why this one? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, I got a quiz here for you. Why do Lycomings build their engines so that the cylinders come off? Anybody? Okay, you, sir. Because you're going to have to before TBO, right? Okay. I've got a prize for you. Okay. I have a genuine 1970s version primer pump from a vintage Cessna aircraft. We don't need it anymore. It's yours for answering the quiz correctly. Come up and claim that later. Why the diesel? Okay. One of the things that we can't talk about, and we're here as part of the experiment to figure out, is what is the typical time you spend on a 50-hour maintenance cycle dealing with the engine? On the new Centurion engine. Trick question. None. There is no 50-hour. Okay, how much do you spend on the 100-hour? Well, there's a 100-hour kit. You get this 100-hour kit from the factory and you open it up, what do you see? 3 filters and some O-rings. You change the oil and you change the filters. Out of a typical 16-hour, 100-hour inspection, you just eliminated somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 hours of maintenance time. And if this engine runs, as we hope that it will, up to TBR, without having to change 2 or 3 of the cylinders, there's an opportunity cost, not only in recovering what would have been lost revenue while you do that maintenance, customer dissatisfaction when the airplane was down, but in the sheer point of what you do to, I don't want to say break the engine, but every time you take it apart and put it back together, there is an opportunity for something else to go wrong. FADEC. It has 2 independent computers that run the engine. It is complete ease of operation, single throttle, up and down. One of the nice things about that is the learners who have never flown before can't abuse the engine. Any of you here flown any of the Citation Series jets? Raise your hand. Okay, lots of you. What happens when you shove the throttle up really fast on takeoff? Not a damn thing. Why? because the FADEC is going to decide how fast you add fuel to the engine, and it waits for you to do it. Is Pete Bunt still here? Man, these guys speak and they leave. They speak, they come and they eat lunch and then they leave. Okay. He'll tell you that in the F-15, you're a voting member. Talk to Eric. You shove the throttles up. You think you get full afterburner? It said, not so fast. I have to do a few things before I can do that. So does this engine. So what it does is it cuts down on the shock that you get not only from people who don't believe there is any intermediate power setting between full out and full in, abusing the engine, pushing it forward, and just as much abusing the engine when they pull it back. Okay? It's like having a speedboat. There are two speeds, idle and full. Okay? All right. And of course, we talk about less fuel burn, a lot less. The figures we're getting right now, and I wish I could tell you that we put a finer pencil on this, but some of the way we did our fuel. But I'm pretty confident to tell you that in our flight training environment, we are averaging about 5 gallons an hour of fuel for the entire flight training program. And we do a lot of pattern work because we do a lot of the instrument work and the cross-country work in the simulator. So we spend a lot of time in the pattern. And of course, Jet A typically costs less. Not everywhere, but typically costs less. Here's that constant speed prop I was talking to you about. It has 2 positions, down and forward. The nice thing is there's lots of intermediates that you can use. If you want to cruise as fast as the engine will go, which is 2,300 RPMs, and there is no restrictions, get it up to 9,000 feet, see about 129 knots true, burning about 6.2 gallons an hour. If you want to throttle back for fuel economy, just knock it off to 2,200 RPM. You'll be burning less than 5 gallons an hour, and you'll be going at about 115 knots true airspeed. Ain't too bad for a Skyhawk at basically half the gas. Okay. Why else? For those of you who are just like this stuff that's on airplanes, and of course I like the stuff that's on airplanes, this is an exquisitely crafted engine. It is obviously something that was designed for a beautiful and well-intended purpose, and it's just good to look at. I mean, it's just a wonderful engine, okay? Now, will it last? God, I hope so, because it just looks great, okay? And if it doesn't, it's going to be a great coffee table in my new job, okay? And of course, it's backed by Continental, which I believe, as Paul, I think, was alluding to, but he was saying it nicely, they didn't know squat about selling and supporting airplanes in the United States, and now we have a company who does. And our support has been excellent. What about the direct operating costs? I think Paul really covered this, but I think right now, when you look at the opportunity costs that you are losing by doing the maintenance on the other engines, the lack of maintenance that you have to do in terms of keeping that airplane flying, I think we're at about a wash between that and a Lycoming IO360 right now. Will it get better? Yeah, it will, because when the TBOs get up, then of course that number is going to become, as Paul told you, and I believe, much, much better. Well, who's going to do that? Well, they can't raise the TBOs on the engine until they get some experience out there that they can show the FAA that it's working. And who's going to be the guinea pig? Well, we've stepped up to do that. We believe in it so much that we're willing to be in that shoes and put 3,000 or 4,000 hours on these airframes as fast as we can and feed that data to Continental. Okay. We made some other modifications to the airplane. Although many of you would argue that we even changed it at all, I thought it could use an upgrade in the interior. Okay. The old Howard Johnson's color scheme was great in the 70s. It should have been taken out in the 80s. Neither you and I are responsible for that, so no big deal. But what we can do is this. We can give it a little makeover, and that's the seats that you see out there today. But this is an example of how remanufacturing an airplane can really actually be beneficial. That is not leather. That is simulated Corinthian vinyl leather, okay? It costs about half the price to buy the product. It lasts longer. It doesn't fade. It can always be matched. And by the way, we can ship you a new back and seat pan when you've had enough ink stains on your seats that you want to change them out. Why? Because we can just reproduce those by template. We'll send it to you, stuff it back on your seat. You don't have to pay somebody to come in and reupholster. What about insulation? And I say that mockingly with a question mark. This is the insulation that came in our 1980 airplane, along with a bunch of nasty as well. Okay? We go through the whole airplane and use the good stuff, which is both a thermal barrier, an acoustic barrier. Tripping over my words here. It's the good stuff throughout the entire airplane. As a matter of fact, I left some panels off right behind the pilot seat so you can see the material that we're using to insulate and soundproof the airplane. And I believe when we do this, because the engine's so quiet, you might not even need a headset. Not that I'm saying to our partners, you know, at Weinhauser that we don't need headsets, but it's going to be nice and quiet, good training environment. Avionics. Now the question comes, what kind of avionics should we have? And of course, if you ask 3 different pilots what kind of avionics you absolutely need in a training airplane, you'll get 5 different opinions. I'm not sure what the right answer is, but I know that everybody would be right to a certain degree, and because of the way that equation works, being a math major, by the way, Paul, that means everybody is wrong to a certain degree. So we put this all together and said, well, it's a training airplane, so what do we really need? Well, here's the avionics that came with it, and I don't really need that anymore, and of course, certainly that thing goes away because it moves over to the other deal, and I don't even know how to use one of those anymore, so we can get rid of that. Okay, and then we can do something to clean this up because that's kind of old. And then we look over here, and there's got to be something better to go over on that thing. I don't even know what that piece was, so I just covered it up. I still don't know what it was. And basically, we can combine those two since it's a single-engine FADAC. And of course, you know what? Let's just start all over here, which we can do. And what did we choose? This was my first choice. Simple, reliable, and fine wood grain paneling, okay? But we actually, I got voted out. So what did we do? We ended up with Aspin Glass. Why? Because it provides the glass capability that we think a training airplane needs. Okay? People need to be exposed to that. At a price that offers us to resell the airplane at a more reasonable carry-on figure to the consumer. We did a Garmin Stack as well. We did the 650, and then we did a simple NavCom. Why? Because I really don't believe you need 4 GPSs in the cockpit. I mean, think about it. You got the basic one, you got your iPad, you've got your iPhone, and now people are wearing GPSs around their watch. How many in a training airplane GPSs do you really need? And tell me, other than the Garmin 1000 when they first came out and the whole screen going blank occasionally, that worked out pretty quickly, how many of you have ever lost a GPS? And how many people, don't put your hand down. You're just telling stories now. No, I believe you. But you got 4 others if you need it, okay? And you know what? There's this thing called a VOR. And if that doesn't work, it's called dead reckoning. You can just go from one place to the other. You can actually look outside the window of an airplane and fly from one place to another. As impossible as that is to believe, you can do that, okay? Now, we're going to put an S-Tech autopilot. And I was going to show you a picture of that S-Tech autopilot, but I have one. Imagine you call the autopilot folks and say, hey, we're going to be rebuilding these airplanes, and we have selected you, as the person to supply us with these autopilots, and we're going to retrofit all our airplanes with your S-Tech 55 autopilot. And boy, we need to get a hold of one so we can install it in the airplane. And boy, we're going to have this conference where we're going to bring in all these people who are key decision makers and buyers, and I still ain't got one. All right? Okay. But what it does show is a problem that we have in this industry in terms of people who supply these parts to the industry. It is what's wrong, okay? The people who manufacture these parts, I can tell you now from experience, aren't very good at what they do. What did you say, Thornton? They sucked? Okay, I'll go with Thornton. Thornton said they sucked. So we'll do that. If we have to hold up production of this airplane for a $5 piece of plastic, I can tell you one thing. We ain't going to do it twice, okay? And I ain't paying $700 for this POS ever again in my life, okay? So what do we do? Don't worry, it was already cracked. Okay. All right. If we're willing to build the airplane, we're willing to build the plastic. Okay, so we're going to explore now doing STCs and PMAs that allow us to supply the parts that we need to put these airplanes on schedule and do them economically, because if I can cut your cost of this part from nearly $700 to, I don't know, $5, okay, that might be something that you're interested in just as much as I'm interested in. Okay, so what do we do? What will all this cost? And this is the part where I wrap up quickly. Whenever I have a question like this, I always think, what would Clyde say? Okay. So I did some research. Being a historical journalist that I am, I'm not, I'm lying about that, just like he's lying about not knowing stuff, okay? What year did Clyde Cessna build his first airplane? Anybody? Okay, I'll give you a minute. You all have electronic devices. Jesus, can't be that hard. We're holding up break. Got anyone want to? Who wants to guess? He's checking his notes. First airplane. 19 begins with a 1. Lower. 1911. What was it called? The Silverwing. Who said Silverwing? All right, Robert, I have for you a special gift. I have a genuine Circa 1980 Cessna interior, complete with the duct tape STC. Use that as you see fit. More gloves are available behind the stage. Okay. So, I went back and did the investigation. There was an article in the Wichita Eagle, November 27th, 1911. Clyde said, not $400,000, Scotty. So, I'm sorry. He's such an easy target. What? What's that? 5. Okay. I'll make it 6 before we end, I promise. Okay. What are our thoughts about this? Here it is. $249,000 or less. And now the ears are picking up or less. When did you ever hear somebody who sells airplanes say the price will be this or less? Okay. What will make it less? Yeah, I said it, less. Okay. And it's apparently on camera here too. Just don't take a picture of this slide, okay? All right, don't take a picture of this one. If the president signs that legislation and we get that through that Pete was talking about, and they make the changes to Part 23, and we can actually spend $135 for our backup altimeter instead of $1,000 for a TSO'd backup altimeter, because I remember the day when there was actually only one altimeter in the airplane. I mean, as crazy as that may seem. When our backup altimeter can cost a little less, we can pass those cost savings on to you. And by the way, the avionics work that's being done for the, you know, I asked you not to take a picture, and there you are with your camera taking a picture. My God. No, that's okay. Take a picture. I said it. Okay. All right. If we can get the avionics that are being built for the experimental market are not only as reliable, in my opinion, but they actually do more. And they're much less, they're much more cost effective for us. So if you think about the avionics suite that we put in, and we can take that avionics suite down by $20,000 and pass that cost on to you, now we're getting the price down to somewhere where you might really like it. Not that you shouldn't like it at $249. Okay. Now, what else will reduce the cost? If I can streamline this process so that we can do this airplane more efficiently and cut down on man hours, we can also reduce the cost. The airplane that you see out there, which aside from the autopilot not being installed and the final flight test and rigging done because we have to put the floorboards back in after we do the autopilot, for all intents and purposes, 4 of us did that in 6 weeks in the hangar next door. I think we can get a lot better at that in the future with the kind of manufacturing processes that we're looking at. And by the way, if you can fly, push, pull, or tow, I sound like Crazy Eddie Auto Works out of Philadelphia. If you can get your airplane to the field, or we'll come and pick it up in our specially modified trailer, okay? And that's true. It's specially modified. That's every time I talk to the guy, he says, I'm modifying it for you right now. So it's a modified trailer. We can probably drop another $40,000 off that price. In fact, if all this could happen, we may be looking at a sub-$200,000 airplane, but all the things have to happen. Okay. But what if you can't afford that? Well, we're going to extend the experiment a little ways, because if we have the airplane and we can't get it out on the market, what's the point? Okay. We know we can deliver the airplane. There are other industries that have had models to get products out to the consumer that have been highly successful, but none of them have been done in aviation. Okay? You can recognize some of those labels right here. Why hasn't it happened in flight training? Because no one's tried. So we're going to try another experiment with the Redhawks. What if this airplane were available to you at a reasonable fee to bring on the airplane, and then you pay power by the hour, and that includes all your direct operating costs, all the insurance, everything else. And by the way, if you don't need the airplane anymore, we'll take it back and place it somewhere where it can be put to good use, and there is no penalty for your exit in that. Okay? And and if you need more, get you some more. You need less? You need more? We'll fly them over there. Actually, we'll have you fly them over there. So we'll do that. Okay? All right. So how would this work? There'd be kind of an initiation fee to get into the community, an hourly usage fee that covers everything, and the airplane's available to you for flight training. Who are our partners in this? Well, Star Aviation is helping us with the insurance problems that were associated with taking an airplane that on face value, Blue Book, is worth $30,000 and now is worth $250,000. And they're going to insure it for the full amount. Bryan Aviation Leasing is going to be taking care of how we set up the lease programs for us. And we have some partners listed at the bottom here that we are going to be using as part of our experiment to see just how well power by the hour will work. Is this an experiment? Of course it is. Is the Redhawk an experiment to prove the concept of diesel engine? Of course it is. But we're in that kind of business, and that's what we're going to do. Okay. Kind of a famous quote, although I never heard of it before the other day. But it goes along with our motto here. We're going to get this just right, and when we've got it just right, what are we going to do with it? Break it. Okay? And figure out if there's a better way to do it. That's exactly what we're trying to do with the Redhawk projects. As all of our experiments, we're going to start it out, and we'll let you know as soon as we know, but everything that we know about the experiment, that information is available to you, and we're reporting that in early spring. Hopefully maybe by the Sun and Fun time frame, but certainly by Oshkosh. Okay? Put this slide in here, gratuitously to you, Jack. Back in my alma mater and Team Cessna, I was there and we had 3 head coaches the time I was there. Russ, Gary, and Jack. And they all had 3 things in common. Well, at least 3 things in common. Well, they had 4 things in common if you count all those damn reserved parking spaces all over Cessna. And I just don't understand. How many cars do you have that you need 26 reserved parking spaces? Okay? You know what Jack gets here as a board member? He gets a chance to look for a parking space like everybody else. Okay? First thing, they understood the fundamentals. And what I mean by that is they understood that flight training is the key to the aviation industry in the United States. And you cannot ignore it or the rest of the industry goes away. Second thing is they were coaching winning teams. And winning teams beget winning teams. And it's how mediocre teams become good teams and then good teams become dynasties. And it's really hard for me to watch my alma mater, which used to be a dynasty, on the road to dumpster in this particular arena, and that is my last shot at Cessna, I promise you. But the last thing they all did is they had a heart of a pilot. And I don't mean they had pilot certificates in their pocket. They had the heart of a pilot. Every time an airplane flew by, what does a pilot do? Looks up at it, okay? Do you look at the airplane like it is a liability, and how much do I have to charge for this? And it's a manufacturing nightmare, and how much am I going to have to pay the HR department, you know, after Roger Sharp gets finished talking at the CPC program meetings? What am I going to, you know, if this is how you look at this business, you are in the wrong business. So what are we going to do? Well, what you're going to get from us is really simple. You're going to get the best value in everything we can put into the airplane, and when those values change, we're going to change along with it. You're going to get reliable, durable parts that go in an already reliable, durable airplane so that you don't have to mess with it with the constant maintenance functions that you're doing. And you're going to have an attractive airplane for your customers to learn in. And we're going to have an airplane that's built by pilots for pilots. And we think that's really important. Okay? So welcome to Team Redhawk. And by the way, we already have a mascot logo. We just got to get one of those guys in those fuzzy costumes to run around during the next migration meeting and do cheers. And now the question is, after all this is said and done, what's next? Well, You know, I don't know, but there's this company called Sikorsky that's got a helicopter type certificate that they're not using. And I'm thinking with the torque that this 2.0 engine runs pretty, you know, I mean, it's got a lot of torque. You could slap one of those bad boys on this helicopter, and all of a sudden you could produce that. Well, anyway, I'm just saying. So thank you very much.